It's time we set the record straight on the perfect macro split to meet your wellness goal. Hey everyone, I'm Abbey Sharp. Welcome to Abby's Kitchen. In today's video, we're going to be looking at what the science says about the best proportions of protein, fat, and carbs that we should be aiming for in our diet. A huge thank you to my friends at Unlocked Fitness and Nutrition who helped with the research on this. Eric Williamson is an RD and PhD, and this is his unique specialty. So if you're looking for any kind of one-on-one support for evidence-based diet consulting for fitness or weight loss, they are your people. So I'm going to be leaving a link to them below. Also keep in mind that I am not suggesting anybody meticulously count out calories or macros in this case. This is simply to help answer questions that I get all the time about general balanced dietary patterns. Let me pop in here super quick, folks, because I'm so excited to be working with Element. This is a product that I was using years ago when I was on my breastfeeding saga, and it really helped me recover. And I also use it a lot in the summer when I'm playing tennis in the heat, and it's always in my bag when I travel. Not to mention, a lot of my colleagues who work in sports nutrition swear by Element specifically because it's got a science-backed electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium, and it's got no colors, sugars, or fillers. I've also found that having my electrolytes in the morning has had a really big positive impact on my sleep. So even on days when I'm not sweating a lot, I will usually still have half a packet. I love all things spicy, so the mango chili is always my fave, but they've got 9 different flavors, including their new chocolate caramel, which is so strangely addictive. Right now, Element is offering my viewers a free sample pack with any order. So that's 8 single serving packets free with any Element order. This is a great way to try 8 other flavors or share Element with a salty friend. So get yours at drinkelement.com/Abbey Sharp, and this deal is only available through my link. So you have to go to drinklmnt.com/Abbey Sharp. And thank you guys again to Element for sponsoring. Don't forget to go to my description and hit up the link drinkelement.com/Abbey Sharp to get yours today. Okay, so remember when the IT diet was if it fits your macros, and bros online were trying to convince one another that eating 5 Pop-Tarts for breakfast when trying to lose weight was like a solid plan? Well, that was based on this assumption that body comp comes down to a specific split of carbs, protein, and fats, aka the 3 macronutrients our bodies depend on to thrive. So I talked about why 100 calories of Pop-Tarts might not be the same as like 100 calories of rice in my video right here, but assuming we're choosing whole food sources, is there a perfect universal macro split that we should all be adhering to? Well, let's break it down by primary goals. First up, let's talk general health goals. And I'm gonna try to build a little bento box situation here based on these general recommendations. Keeping in mind that this should not be copied or followed, this is not precise, this is not an exact science, because foods don't just contain 1 macro. So just something to keep in mind. I'm showcasing this top level here for comparison's sake. So major health authorities have crafted a recommended macro split for the general population called the AMDRs. So this split has some flexibility because these things don't need to be exact, but it's loosely 45 to 65% of calories from carbohydrates, 10 to 35% of calories from protein, and 20 to 30% of your calories from fat. So these ranges are based on what is associated with reduced risk of chronic disease. However, when you dive in, our absolute minimum needs are actually pretty low for carbohydrates and fat. And one could argue that we don't actually have minimal needs for carbohydrates, considering that our bodies can enter a state of ketosis to help keep us alive in the absence of carbs. Now, fat needs are actually quite low as well, excluding the minimal needs for essential fatty acids like omega-6s and omega-3s. That said, going below the AMDRs can increase the risk of hormonal dysfunction. So consuming below 20% of energy from fat can increase the risk of reduced testosterone in men and reduced estrogen in women. And going below 35% of energy needs from carbs has also been shown to increase the risk of low testosterone in men and amenorrhea in active women, particularly when accompanied by a low-calorie diet. Now, a large reason for this macro split recommendation is not just about the fat, protein, and carbs themselves, but about the micronutrients that this dietary pattern tends to encourage. So, for example, Although vitamin and mineral deficiencies leading to disease are rare, carbohydrate-restricted diets can result in suboptimal levels of thiamine, folate, vitamin C, magnesium, and fiber. And on the other hand, a fat-restricted diet can result in suboptimal intakes of vitamin E and omega-3s. So this is generally why we recommend balance over restriction. But that leaves us with protein. So aside from water, we have a greater need for protein than any other macronutrient because a large proportion of our body is made up of protein. So the recommended protein intake for government guidelines is 0.8 grams per kilogram as the minimum to prevent disease. But we don't just want to survive, we want to thrive. So the optimal intake for protein for general health is at least 1.2 grams per kilogram per day, or around 15% of your calories. This is particularly important for preventing muscle loss as we age, and it's basically what most people on non-restrictive diets are kind of getting anyway. So to quickly recap this section, if the goal is to maintain good health, a varied diet consisting mostly of whole foods, 45 to 65% from carbohydrate, 20 to 35% from fat, and a protein intake of at least 1.2 grams per kilogram, or around 15 to 35% will be ideal for most adults. Next, let's talk about the ideal macro ranges for weight loss. So although the keto and frugivores could argue all day about whether we should be limiting carbs or fat respectively, the reality is it actually doesn't matter that much when it comes to fat loss rate. In fact, the differences have been described as physiologically meaningless. Not just that, but according to the Diet Fits research study, there was no difference in fat loss rates regardless of whether someone had the genetics to supposedly present as more fat responsive or more carb responsive, or how insulin sensitive somebody actually was. Some people will just find low fat easier, and some people will find low carb easier. Long-term tolerance and adherence is really what matters most when it comes to weight loss success. So we now know that specific amounts of carbs and fat are less important when it comes to weight loss. Let's talk about what is important as a macro: protein. Protein is the one macronutrient that can make a difference in fat loss rates. So higher protein intakes have been shown to result in more weight loss and less lean mass loss, resulting in as much as a 3-time greater effect on fat loss when going from a diet that is about 10 to 15% protein to one that is 20 to 30% protein. And there's a few main reasons why this is. Number one, protein is king in the satiety hierarchy in my hunger crushing combo, so it helps with appetite control and diet adherence better than any other food component. So for example, one study found that people spontaneously ate over 400 calories less when they increased calories from protein from 15 to 30%. Number two, protein uses more energy for processes such as protein synthesis, which burns calories and can therefore contribute to the calorie deficit. And number three, you need more protein to stimulate protein synthesis when you're in a calorie deficit on a diet. So a higher protein intake helps to spare muscle mass from being broken down as fuel. So yeah, protein is king for weight loss, but how much is enough?
Hey, I got you guys a protein shake.
Awesome, I love protein.
Protein.
Well, ultimately, this is really going to depend on the size of the calorie deficit. A greater percentage of energy deficiency for weight loss, the more protein is recommended. If we consider that most people should be aiming for 0.5 to 1% weight loss per week, which is a rate that also allows for optimal retention of muscle mass, that would coincide with about a 20% deficit and at least 1.8 grams per kilogram of protein. Okay, so in summary, the percentage from carbs and fat matter a lot less than protein when it comes to weight loss, but while we are in a calorie deficit, we want to push our protein intake towards around the 30% range and at least 1.8 grams per kilogram while maintaining the general AMDRs for carbs and fat. Also, please remember that weight loss is both difficult and can pose a risk for your relationship with food, so always work with a dietitian like one from Unlocked if this is your goal to help both reduce this risk and increase your chances of keeping it off. So as we've now seen, there's a baseline for protein that unless you're on an extreme frugivore diet or just not eating enough calories period, you are almost surely meeting. Needs will increase when in a calorie deficit, and they can potentially increase on a per kilogram of body weight basis even further when the goal is muscle gain. As this systematic review found, optimal muscle mass gains come at 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram per day of protein intake. So that is around 0.75 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. But because only so much protein can be used for muscle protein synthesis in one sitting, research like this review paper from our friend Eric at Unlocked Nutrition shows that it's important to spread your intake out with at least 0.3 grams per kilogram per meal in 4 to 5 meals or snacks per day. So usually this is around the 20 to 35 gram per meal mark. Again, the other macronutrients are arguably less important for muscle gain, but there is evidence that sticking to a very low carb diet can potentially result in lower performance of strength training workouts, which would impact your rate of muscle and strength gain over time, giving it a slight edge over fat when it comes to importance. To summarize, if muscle gain is the goal, you're not going to be in that same calorie deficit that you might be for weight loss. You might even be in a caloric surplus. So even though the total grams per kilogram of protein could potentially be around the same or even higher, around 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram, the percentage of calories from protein is lower than that is seen with weight loss when we have to be more mindful of muscle sparing. So generally this looks like about 20% of calories from protein per day spread out between several meals, and again, staying within the AMDR ranges for carbs and fat. And finally, let's talk about endurance exercise goals. So things like moderate to vigorous, longer sessions of things like running, biking, swimming, etc. Here, the tables turn and carbohydrates start to really matter. As you can see in this chart right here, the higher the intensity and longer the workout, the more carbohydrate is needed to help fuel the activity and refill those glycogen stores. We also need to consider protein. This one actually might surprise you, but folks who are endurance training for at least 1 to 2 hours of at least moderate intensity training actually need about 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram, which is on par with the recommendations for weight loss and muscle gain. And this is because protein is used as a fuel source during endurance training, and what you burn off needs to be replaced afterwards. Also, don't forget that protein is important for a lot more than just muscle size. There are so many different adaptations to endurance exercise that involves our proteins in our body. So things like the mitochondria, blood vessels, the heart, etc. This was actually part of Eric from Unlocked's PhD thesis, who suggested that if you're exercising for over an hour of at least moderate intensity, you should be aiming for about 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram, or 15% of energy needs from protein, whichever one is the higher value. Interestingly, endurance is really like the only scenario where macros differ between the sexes. So women use more fat as fuel and less carbohydrates, but honestly the difference ends up being like less than 10 grams of carbohydrates used per hour for women by men. So that's like 3 spoonfuls of rice, and definitely not something that we need to stress over too much. Also interestingly, women have lower protein needs in the follicular phase of their menstrual cycle, but their needs during the luteal phases are the same as men. So generally speaking, we keep protein recommendations steady across the cycle to prevent deficiency. So to summarize, protein and carbs are particularly important for endurance exercise. Your calorie needs will be high when doing intense endurance exercises. So even though protein needs are again quite high, around 1.8 grams per kilogram, this amounts to the general health average of around 50% of your calories from protein. A higher proportion of calories should be coming from carbohydrates depending on the intensity of your exercise, so around the 60 to 65 mark. And then you're filling the rest of the gaps with your fat. So there you have it. Depending on your goals, your caloric needs and macro splits will be very different. And within those goals, needs are highly individualized. So if you do have specific goals, I highly recommend working with a dietitian like my colleagues at Unlocked. I'm going to be leaving a link to their content below. And on that note, that's all that I have for you guys today. If you like this video, be sure to give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment below if you've got any other questions, and I'll see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye!